Matt, tell me, what was your reaction when I told you the following guest was going to be joining us on the Raw Rugby Podcast this week?
I know my mum listens to this, so I can't swear, but holy hecker. I think that might have given it away a little bit.
I don't know. I don't know if it has, but
yesterday. Yeah, you messaged me yesterday, and you're like, "Oh, I should," you might not have a get, blah blah blah. And then, any ideas? And then all of a sudden, you just landed this behemoth. So, beauty.
Well, I'm glad that we've got one podcast follower in your mum, so that's pleasing to know. But I threw that out on Twitter, and we've had a few people come back with some interesting choices. Dan McKellar being one. We'll get Dan on it at some point in time. Matt Dunning, that made me laugh. I thought we're going to have a segue with a drop kick first before we think about Matt Dunning. Tane Edmund, I think he's riding the high off the back of 33 points for North Harbour. Yeah, so we'll let him continue to ride his high and maybe settle down first. Peter Horn, well, I don't know if I'd be the number one fan of Peter Horn just at the moment after firing a shot his way over the last week or so. But our podcast guest this week is the former World Cup winning coach, a man that knows the Bledisloe Cup extremely well, has drunk out of it several times, and that's Steve Hansen.
Holy hecker!
How good is Bledisloe Cup week? This is the Christmas of Australian rugby fans, I would say.
Yeah, it is. It's the one time in the year where I think rugby very much gets in the it's centre of the sporting the nation. You know, it's the obviously racing as a Melbourne Cup, AFL Grand Final Day, Ashes, Boxing Day Test, all this, and this Bledisloe Cup week's our big one. So it's good.
Well, it's a funny thing on Sydney in September, and we've got the Swans that are going to be playing on Friday night. That sold out really quickly. I think it's great that that's on a Friday because I hope you're right in the sense that people will be able to tune in. It's a Saturday afternoon fixture, 3:45. You don't often see that in Australia. I know that there's been a couple of afternoon fixtures in New Zealand over the last decade or so, but an afternoon Bledisloe Cup game at the Olympic Stadium, it's the sort of thing that you want to tune in for.
Yeah, it is. And it's nice to see, look, I don't know if it's out of desperation or what in terms of getting crowds, but it's nice to see those that, the powers that be giving back to the fans because ultimately an 8 o'clock isn't the most convenient time, particularly for those with kids. And, so it's good giving back to the fans. And, I think it'll be received well.
All right, so we're going to be talking a lot about the Bledisloe Cup. Obviously, this week there was no real rugby of significance from an Australian perspective over the weekend. We don't need to talk about Argentina. That's come and gone, hasn't it? But we will be getting to some questions from that I put out on Twitter beforehand. I said, look, if you've got any questions for Matt, Tamura and I for the pod, we'll jump to it. So we're going to come to those after our conversation with Steve Hansen. But one of them did ask around what would your team be this week for the Bledisloe Cup. And so I think we probably could race through it, given there's not going to be that many changes. We know what the squad is. Hunter Paisami, Fraser McWright were notable additions from the touring party in Argentina. No Angus Blythe, he's dropped out of it. Probably not a huge surprise, but it is interesting having seen Angus be part of Schmidt's squad for the first 7 tests and then drop out of it. So it was a big surprise that he was in there. Maybe less of a surprise he's dropped out, but Josh Canham stays in the squad as well. So a couple of flankers to choose from between Carlo Tizzano and Fraser McWright. Does Fraser come immediately back in? Is Hunter Paisami going to be fit? I think he's more likely for the second test in Wellington. But we know that Tom Wright's back, having missed that test. So we know that Noah Lolasio's fit as well. So when you consider all that, Lukan Salakai-Loto and other, let's start from, and we're recording this Monday evening for a Tuesday morning release. What would you think that the squad will be? And let's start in the top 5.
Yeah. So to be honest with you, most of my selections are going to be very similar to the first Argentinian game. I think no huge surprises. I think Angus Bell has been a massive shining light for us. I think he's looked really, really good. I wouldn't change too much. I think Lucan will slot straight back in as well. I think very much similar to the first Argentinian test there.
Would you be having Fraser come straight back in, having not played since the Georgia match, which was third week of July?
It's a tough one because Tizano's been good too. I think he's looked up to scratch in terms of he hasn't looked out of place at all. Fraser for me though is a genuine one of the best sevens I think in going around at the moment. Still got a lot to prove at international level, but I think potentially he has that. Whether they bring him in this game or next game, I'm not so certain. I don't know if he's a kind of player that you can have on the bench. His height probably limits his line-out jumping options. So in terms of covering positions on the bench, I think you'd start him. Look, if he's looking good, I'd be starting him. I think on ball, slowing the game down, the Kiwis down, and then one thing he is amazing at, as you see, is his ability to pop up in places. He reads the game so well, reads offloads well, and against the Kiwis, there's going to be a lot of that, particularly on a dry track, 330, 345. So I'd put him back in.
What about Hamish Stewart? We think he's been reasonable in his first couple of tests. Defensively, clearly the Wallabies struggled in the latter stages of that second match in Argentina, but I don't think he's been terrible. And I do think that Hunter is racing the clock. If he's back, I think he does come immediately back in, but I don't think you'd be experimenting too much otherwise with that back line, would you? Would it be just Noah Lolesio still at 10 and Tom Wright at fullback? Is Callaway on the right wing? We know that Jorgensen started last week, but would you be looking for, once again, what the similar side that started in the first win?
Yeah, definitely. And if Hunter's good, I'd throw him straight back in. If he's not, I'd stick with Hamish. I think, he's 3 games into his career now, so better than no games. So, it's a process that it'll take time. So, he's another guy who hasn't looked, massively out of place. It's been a rough trip over there, well, particularly the last game, but I think he's going to be better for it. So I think it'd be good. And I think Joe does seem like a little bit of a pick and stick kind of guy. It would probably be a bit of a tall ask to be asking a guy like David Feluai to start, in his maiden test. So, I'd be very stock standard.
Yeah, I agree. I just remember in 2020 when yourself and James O'Connor were injured, right? And the two of you picked up injuries in in Auckland. And then the next test, you've got Noah Lolesio starting on debut and outside Imure Simone. And it was the first time, I think, in about almost 40 years that there was a brand new 10 and 12 for a test, definitely against the All Blacks, but it might have been actually full stop too.
Yeah, and critical positions, particularly, well, I guess less so now in the sense that I think I've mentioned this before, that the 10-12 combination was quite crucial in terms of calling, because that's how we played the dual playmakers, whereas now it's a little bit more 10-15. So yeah, look, I think it's still important, but Hamish Stewart, I think, for me, stick with it. The only other one would be, I'm not sure if he's back from injury, is Fluke. Is he?
Yeah, he'll be around. Yep.
Yeah, so I think he's definitely worth considering as well.
What, in the 12 position or?
Yeah. Like I said, I think that the centers are a bit more similar nowadays. I don't think you have that kind of the way I've been seeing his selections. I would say your centers are far more alike, and then it's your 10-15 that you want to have a bit of playmaking. Hence, Kellaway or Tom Wright at fullback seems to be the go, rather than say like a Tom Banks or a Israel Folau who are the genuine athletes. So I think that the centers can kind of switch around. It's much easier to go from 13 to 12 the way they're playing, just particularly defensively. So we'll see. What
do you think expectations should be heading into this Bledisloe? Because obviously massive defeats, comprehensive defeats against South Africa, and then one win, one loss in Argentina. It was interesting that the Wallabies, the 2 games that have been in the wet in the Rugby Championship, the Wallabies fared better, and that perhaps is because rain can be an equaliser at times. But what do you think expectations should be? Because New Zealand, like, it's so rare for both these two sides to be 3 defeats from 4 matches, and more common for Australia, far less common for New Zealand to be anywhere near this sort of position. But does Australia have a chance?
I think we definitely have a chance. It's a young squad with so much to kind of focus on and improve. I dare say they won't be thinking too much about the Kiwis as much as it is Bledisloe week, and we like to. You're probably closer to it than I am at the moment, but I'm sure they're very much about their process and, just kind of improving that, preparing better, and then kind of seeing what happens on the weekend. I think we will be boosted with a few of those inclusions. I think if we had a similar team as we did in the second test, I would be very, very worried.
Yeah, well, exactly. And fingers crossed we don't see that. I was surprised, and it was interesting, like, amongst all the records that were broken in Santa Fe the other week, the fact that the All Blacks haven't actually put on more than, I think it was 57 points against the Wallabies, it's almost surprising, given that they can rack up massive scorelines against anyone. I think they will. Scott Robertson, there'll be an element of nerves around him, given that no All Blacks coach wants to give up the Bledisloe Cup. They just don't want to be that first person to do it. But he'll be so battled hardened, won't they, off the back of 2 games against South Africa, even though they've lost 3 of their last 4. This is they're still a very good side.
Yeah, and they look like they probably should have won that first test. And then they were right in it in the second one as well. And like I've said this many times before, that's a South African team at the peak of their powers. So it's a pretty good, yardstick in that sense for the Kiwis. So they're not far off. But rugby is a game of momentum, as in the game as much as consecutive games as well. So I think, he'd be nervous. And I think you saw it. I don't know if you see that presser where he's answering questions about the selection changes he made, and you could see he was quite defensive in the way he responded. So he's definitely a man under pressure. So I think if we can start well, which we actually have started pretty well in most of our tests this year, if we can do that and apply a little bit of pressure, it's a funny old game, particularly at home.
Well, that's where Taniela Tupou and Angus Bell are so crucial to that, to get the seat piece right. Like the All Blacks front row, I think they've done a great job. Like Cody Taylor was just immense in South Africa, but their props, they've been big minutes, but they've been dominant. They were dominant through Super Rugby as well. So watch that space on there. We definitely need to see more from Taniela Tupou. That's for certain. And he's come under a bit of slack recently, hasn't he? But it's warranted, because you need to expect more from a person that's paid $1 million to be playing more than 35 minutes.
Yeah, look, I think just more from the money aside, just his potential. I think most of it comes from frustration. Like we're not saying that about some guy who's struggling to cut the mustard. He's a guy who well and truly belongs in the test arena and can dominate and has dominated in the past. So I like the Kiwis were quite interesting in they're not as confident in their props as particularly South Africans. I think we saw. A couple of their props went almost the distance, and then the guy come on last minute. Oh no, it was remind me of his name. He gave the penalty away, which essentially kind of cost the game a little bit.
It was fascinating because I was actually at where the All Blacks are training and camped this week at the Intercontinental, and Jason Ryan was doing media today, the assistant coach, and he was asked about that, and he said, well, look, Fletcher New actually tweaked his calf, I think it was, in the warm-up, and then he retweaked it during at halftime, like warming up. So there was probably a reason why he came on as late as he did. But the fact that they didn't turn to the bench earlier than a lot of other international sides is interesting. But you can't replace a guy like Cody Taylor when he's going as well as he was, and Tupou similarly was having another great game. So that was fascinating how they used their bench.
Yeah, that probably answers my question in a way. I like Fletcher Newell's a very good scrummager as well. So I was super surprised to not see much faith behind it. But yeah, look, it just shows it's it's an interesting game, rugby, and you get thrown up, curveballs left, right, and centre, and so that makes a fair bit of sense, I guess.
Well, there's a couple of Aussies really in this New Zealand side in the front row with Tyrell Lomax and Tamati Williams. So there's great stories there with that duo, and it'll be fascinating to see if they start against the Wallabies, and hopefully we hear from them this week, because Tamati's just an unbelievable presence, a wrecking ball. He can run like the wind, and he's strong, and he's a character as well. So it's nice to see these guys emerging. Hopefully, going down the track, we can keep these players and we don't see them in the All Blacks jerseys. But one thing that I've been interested by as well this week, and probably over the last year, is it wasn't that long ago that you'd have the odd Wallaby come out and go, no, we can win the Bledisloe this week. And or this year. And I don't think we're going to be hearing that come out of the players' mouths this week. Like we might have in the past. I know that Will Genia often would be very confident about, we should win. We've got a bloody good team. Why won't we? But it does change. It speaks of the psychology of where the Wallabies are at, perhaps, where we're not quite as bullish as we once were.
Yeah. And look, players aren't always, we've said this before, players aren't always the best kind of barometers of truth. We delude ourselves in so many ways, and because you have that tunnel vision, and ultimately it's to get a result. But I think if stepping back from that, if you have a look at it, like, it would be a pretty amazing effort, really, if we got up this week, or the Bledisloe in general. So in terms of the actual cup. So yeah, look, I think this team is a very well prepared team. It's a team that's not really not overselling. They're very much trying to over deliver and undersell, and that seems to be the way that Laurie Fisher and Joe are going about it, which is nice. Look, it might not sell as many tickets, but hopefully it brings a few results in time.
Yeah, indeed. All right, I think it's about time that we go to our guests. And on the other side of this, we're going to go to our special guest, Steve Hansen. Well, it's a very warm welcome to the former All Blacks coach, the former World Cup winning coach, Steve Hansen. Steve, thanks for coming on the Raw Rugby Podcast.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. Good to see you both again.
Steve, Bledisloe week, so it's an appropriate time to have you on. Do you ever get to this stage of the year and wish that you were still coaching?
No, I'm pretty happy I've done my time. They're exciting weeks, though, and especially for the teams and everybody involved in it, and the fans as well, I think, because there's a great rivalry between us and Australia, and there's a mateship as well. So I think both have come off losses, so there'll be two hungry teams.
Is it a bit of a nerve-wracking time as well, particularly when you're a first-year head coach with the All Blacks, given the legacy, given how long the All Blacks have had that grip on the Bledisloe Cup?
I can only speak for my own time, and the first Bledisloe is, it is a scary moment, because you don't want to be the bloke that lets it go, or be part of the team that lets it go. But it's business as usual. They'll be preparing well, as they always do, and as will Aussie. They've just come off not a performance they're too happy about, I would suggest, and Joe will be driving them pretty hard. And there's no test match between New Zealand and Australia that isn't well contested. I think they're good contests.
What do you make of the innovations with the Anzac Day test, potentially having the Super Rugby played beforehand? I know someone who probably appreciates the history of it, but also understands the game needs to grow and evolve. Do you think it's a good idea?
Well, anything that helps the game grow and gets fans interested in it's got to be good. And we're so close, so we need to be playing each other on as often as we can, and try and build the standards of both teams to a higher level, and competition does that. So having the opportunity to bring something like Anzac Day into it, because as we know, there's a strong bond there because of the past. Can't think of anything better than playing a test match on Anzac Day, and takes on a few other sports as well.
What do you think of the recent comments about South Africa leaving and the standard, and that kind of the impact that's had on on the Aussies and Kiwis? Do you think they're far-fetched, or there's a little bit of truth to it?
I think there's a lot of truth to it. I think, that we all know they play a different style of rugby to both New Zealand and Australia, and it's a style that's abrasive and it's very, very physical. And at the moment they're very inventive as well. Aussie's, not shy of reinventing what they're doing, and you want to be playing against teams like that, I think, every week or as much as possible. And Super Rugby allowed that to happen. It's a difficult place to tour. If you haven't been there before, it can be daunting as well and overwhelming. So the more times you go there and play, I think the better. So Super Rugby is poorer for South Africa not being in it.
If you were All Blacks coach at the time when the decision was made to pull the cord, or cut the cord rather, would have you tried to influence a position there around, well, hang on, guys, what does this mean long term from the high performance perspective and indeed just the actual competition itself?
Yeah, look, I think there would have been a lot of conversations around it. And, at the end of the day, administrators are administrators, and they make decisions based on what they think's right, and not necessarily is it always right for the players and the management of the team. But, without being privy to being there, you don't know what was said and what wasn't. I would have liked to have thought that, there would have been some strong discussions around it. But at the end of the day, if the administrators want to go in a direction, they'll go in it, and you've just got to go with it.
Where do you see the state of the game at the moment, particularly with a Trans-Tasman focus? Because we know that the World Cup last year was a spectacular event, and that quarterfinal weekend was extraordinary. But Mills's comments just last week about Super Rugby not being able to produce those world-class players at the moment, that's been kind of knocking on the door for a little while, and it is an alarming comment to be hearing as well.
Yeah, well, I think we just have to have a wee look at what they are doing well up in the Northern Hemisphere, and say, look, are we doing that down here? And compare, what they're doing well, what they're not doing so good. What are we doing well? Keep doing that, and add in the other stuff that will make us stronger and better. And it starts with our underage playing group. We've got to get them stronger. How do we give them more competition? Like, I think in the past we've been very limited in our number of games before tournaments, and the super competition is not what it was. So we need to make sure that we try and bring that back to being more competitive. And I think that's underway. I think they're trying to come up with ideas. It's difficult, but we've got to challenge ourselves, because they've got a ready-made market in the Northern Hemisphere. You've got all these teams very close, don't have to travel. And you'd know, Matty, like the travel was killed the players, didn't it? Like having to go to Argentina, then round to South Africa, and then back to Australia or back to New Zealand, and it was the same for all four teams. And by the time you get to the end of the year, you're knackered. Whereas up north, 3 hours probably the longest flight they've got to take. So it's pretty, there's a lot of advantages because of that up there. But we have to be innovative in what we're doing and bite the bullet, and there's some new competitions coming up that are going to help us, because there's going to be more interaction with the Northern Hemisphere.
Since the international game, in particular Northern Hemisphere, has really affected Australian rugby a lot, and diluted kind of our playing stocks. And I remember speaking to a few Kiwi guys in Japan, and they said that they were seeing it from a younger level, that when players weren't making the cut, they'd go off to England, France, Japan, or even more recently the States. Do you see New Zealand potentially following that trend?
I think they've already started to follow it. We've got players going at a lot younger age. I had a guy ring me not so long ago saying, look, I'd love to come up to Japan, and I talked to him and said, look, you've got the potential to be an All Black. Why wouldn't you stay and give that a crack and then come up later? Like, you're going to be worth more money, and Japan's not going anywhere. Europe's not going anywhere. So, but, they're all in a bit of a hurry today, and they see what's on offer, and the excitement of going to somewhere new and doing something more exciting, I guess, is dragging them away. So again, we have to be innovative in what we do and how we do it. And the powers that be have got their heads together, I suppose, at the moment, trying to sort that out.
Yeah, I sense what you're getting to there is in terms of selection, and I think it was at 15 we implemented the ghetto law, and we've often been compared to New Zealand, saying, "Oh, listen, they keep their players local," but it's just not a like-for-like comparison. Do you think New Zealand will head down that way?
I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of fear around it. If you look at the Northern Hemisphere, and you take in the league when we were doing it with the league, and it didn't really work for us. And it's a massive job trying to coordinate your Northern Hemisphere. Maybe Australia and Japan and those places, being in a similar time zone, it's a possibility. But again, it's got to be right, and it can't destroy the competitions we've got at home. So somehow we have to be able to do it in a way that it allows us to have access to the people that we want and need, but it also doesn't allow us to ruin our own competitions. So it's not an easy task, and again, it's one that both Australia and New Zealand probably are working hard together at trying to work their way through it.
As in terms of growing the interest and revenue in the game down here, Japan's obviously a little bit of a seems like an elephant in the room. But one thing I noticed when I was there was that it's not as simple as putting the Sunwolves together. The game has quite a bit of history and politics up there. Is there a way, do you think, that they could come up with a promotion relegation, or it's far too complicated?
It's pretty complicated, and I think the companies run everything up there as opposed to the rugby union. They don't really have too much say. Are the companies strong enough to play in Super Rugby? Probably not, the way they're structured at the moment. So if they were to join the competition, it would have to be at a time that it doesn't affect the Japanese competition. And rightly so, they've got to look after how they develop their game, and they've got to develop the Japanese players. As you can't just keep turning foreigners into Japanese players. The game, there's enough good Japanese players up there to, if they take the time and to develop them, they'll end up being very good. So part of the process of that competition is making sure that the Japanese guys get plenty of time on the track. And you've got big squads, as you know. We've got 53 in ours. Honda, I think, have got over 60. A lot of clubs have got over 55. And there's no games for the second tier guys. So if you don't make the 23, how do they develop them? So, we've got to try and get games for them. We're busy trying to do friendlies, but it would be good if the Japanese, before they went into a super competition, actually put the money towards a second tier competition for those guys. And I think, for me, that would be better value for the development of the game at this stage, rather than joining a super competition.
Yeah, it's a fascinating time in the world rugby market, and you think about a couple of other players that I'm sure Eddie Jones will be looking at, and that's Harry Hockings and Isaac Lucas, a couple of talented guys, and up there from an Australian perspective. Talking about Australia, there was a great running battle, and I don't know if that battle is still there. It seems to be very one-sided with the Bledisloe over some time now. When you look from afar and you spent a little bit of time with the Wallabies last year, what do you think a couple of the things that Australian rugby's got to get right over the next few years? Because with the Lions next year in a Home World Cup, there's obviously a fair bit of money going to come into the game. What should be the one or two absolute things they've got to get right and focus and target?
I think, good rugby players come out of good high performance environments. And if you allow too many people into those environments without having to work too hard, then, you get a soft underbelly. And when I think of Australia and when they were really, really strong and winning World Cups and so forth, they really only had 3 super teams. And I understand the need to grow the game across the country, and whether they do that with a national competition and then go to 3 different franchises, selecting from all those teams that are playing in Australia, to say, right, here's the best. If you had 35 in each team, you're going to have 110, 115 so players. And to get in there, you're going to have to be really working hard. You're wanting to be better all the time, and there's a competition to get in. And at the moment, I think it's too easy to get a super contract. It's easy for me to talk about this because I'm sitting back, not having to make any of the decisions. So
there's a lot of Aussies that have said it.
Yeah, but it's not an easy solution because you've still got to develop rugby and on the West Coast and down south in Melbourne and those places. We need rugby being played in all of Australia, just like we need it being played in all of New Zealand. So how do we do that, but yet still be able to manufacture competition for professional players and a pathway for them to go into? So, and it costs money, and it's not something Australia Rugby have a lot of. So there's another difficulty.
Yeah, and continue on that point. Even from a leadership perspective, there's been 16 debutants for the Wallabies this year, which is a truckload through 7 tests off the back of a lot of debutants last year. There's also been 8 captains in 15 tests. You spent a bit of time with the leadership last year with Eddie and a few days in France. You had 2 or 3 captains, and the All Blacks had 2 or 3 captains for 12 years. Do you think that kind of sums up where Australia is at the moment, that the fact that there's so many new players and there's so many captains, that can't be a good thing?
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing either. When you're captain, you actually work out the nuts and bolts of what leadership's about and what's required and what you can do to help the captain. We only had 2 or 3 captains, but we had 12 leaders in the group all the time, and over a period of time they changed. So their responsibility, first and foremost, is to be the best players on the park. But then it's also their leaders because they can lead themselves first, and they can take some responsibility and lead others in a positive manner. So it's not just the captain that has to do that. So I can see what Joe's trying to do. He's trying to expose as many people as he possibly can to A, Test rugby, so hence the new caps, but B, his leadership with the captains. He's rotating it around saying, righto, well, get a taste of it. This is what we need from our leading players, and we need you to be, just because you've got CAPT beside your name this week, if you don't have it next week, you still need to be a leader and still need to help drive this team to be to a higher level. And, that takes time. He's trying to speed that process up by giving them the opportunity to be up front and actually lead the group.
I think the Springboks team at the moment, Steve, it's probably, in my view anyway, the only team that's rivaled the 2015 All Blacks team, and headed up by 2 amazing captains, inspirational, and Richie and Sia. What was a guy like Richie and we think of Dan Carter coming back from injury that year as well? What did those guys do that separated from the best?
We were really fortunate. We had a loose forward trio of Jerome Kino, Kieran Reid, and Richie McCaw. So, you talk about South Africa, they've got a loose forward trio. Peter Steph-Latoya, amazing player. I'm lucky enough to coach him at Toyota and just know how good he is. So, when you have combinations like that, those really great players, they just got to do their job. And when they go about preparing well, and that's, great teams with great players always prepare well. And they know how to go into the deep places to mentally to be able to get themselves where they need to be able to perform at their very, very best. And McCall was able to do that week in, week out. Like, he did hardly ever played a bad game. And I've seen a lot of them, from Canterbury Crusaders through to the All Blacks. So he was mentally very good at getting himself where he needed to play. And Dan was different to Richie. He was more outgoing guy, and he was the first five and loved life to the max. But he played footy like that. So again, if he prepared well and he was injury free, then you knew you were going to get a good performance from him. So, but they were well supported, those guys, by other great players.
Oh, they certainly were. There was, it'd be amazing if you could have that 23 Springbok side up against that All Black side of 2015, and it's never going to happen, obviously. But wow, Rugby Australia's been looking very closely at New Zealand rugby's IP for some time now, and Joe Schmidt, Dave Rennie previously, and we know that Mike Cron's here, and obviously Mick Byrne for a long time too. You popped your head in last year in France for a few days. When you reflect and you think back to those few days in Paris, do you look back fondly at it? And would Joe ever be able to twist your arm to be able to lean on you like Eddie might have?
Oh, look, I'd never coach Australia because my job's been done in that area. So, but I enjoyed my time in there because they were a good group of men who were trying to do the best they could for themselves and their country. And one rugby team is not that much different to another one. You've got guys who are there, they're mates, they're trying their best, and there were things that I saw that surprised me, and I'm not going to go into those things, but if you haven't got your high performance right, then players aren't going to arrive at the test arena with all the things they need ticked and understood, and that makes it hard because you've got to learn it at the very highest level. And that, for me, that's what rugby's about at the lower levels. You're preparing people to be better at a higher level. And along the way, you can win tournaments and competitions, and, that's great. But what you're really trying to do is get everybody in your group better. And if they're good enough, then they go to the next level. But they go there with the fundamentals really well taught, the mental skills to be able to cope with it, and, leadership and all that sort of stuff. And like, we talk about leadership a lot, but leadership is really about leading yourself. How you get through the dark moments, how you get through the moments when things don't go right, how you get through the things when they're going really good and you keep your feet grounded. It's about preparing yourself well. And if you don't have all of those understandings to the highest level, then you get found out at test level. I think that's where Australia Rugby really needs to work hard at helping their players fast track them to a higher level by giving them, educating them really, and making it more competitive. That's why I think competition makes you want to be better. And again, like Matty, you'd be able to explain this better than me because you've been a player at that high level, wanting to be in the team. And when you're not getting what you want, you work harder. You don't roll up in a ball if you're a good player and let it just all go. You keep working harder and harder until you get what you're striving for.
Yeah, I think that softer underbelly, what you're saying before, is very much a symptom of something deeper. And guys like Richie and all these other guys, as once in generation players, they were very much a product of a system working well. And I think, unfortunately, our players at the moment and towards the latter part of my career, I also noticed you didn't go into that dark place as much. If you're struggling for a contract, you could probably go to another province rather than out of a job. And then I think that desperation is probably quite evident in that sense. It becomes quite obvious.
Steve, we're not used to having tough conversations in Australian rugby. We're always looking for the quick fix, a new coach or whatever it might be, a new captain, a new 10. It seems like it's a revolving door every week. Is it about time, do you think, that Australian rugby have those harder conversations, because people like Ben Darwin have spoken a long time that Australian rugby can't support 5 teams at the moment. And I know Eddie said it, and I know that you've indicated here that it's too easy to get a super contract, and that's having the flow-on effects with the Wallabies. Like, at some point in time, when do you think RA is going to actually look at itself and go, no, enough is enough?
Oh, to be fair to them, I think they're doing that, but like it's not as easy as just saying we're going to have 3 teams. Like, who are you going to get rid of? You know, and so like it has to. It's not just coming up with the idea; it's actually coming up with everybody buying into the idea. Like, we're having the same problem at the moment in New Zealand with the governance of the game. Like, we can't get everyone to buy into that, which is really a shame, because we're not going to go forward until we do get that. And it's the same in Australia. Like, if everyone doesn't buy into, and some people are going to have to take the pill and suffer, and everyone will say, well, yeah, no, this is what we should do, but I'm not taking the pill. You know, they can. And that's why I'm saying, like, to find a way where you can do the building of the game in Australia, because you've got competition on many fronts, different sports that have got good administration, good money, good broadcasting money. They've got good marketing strategies, league, for example. Now, how do we in Australia say to ourselves, right, well, we've got to grow our game, but we've also got to have a higher echelon that we now. I can't see Queensland, New South Wales saying, well, no, we're not going to be in the Super 12. We're going to let's call them A, B, and C, rather than New South Wales and Queensland and Brumbies. But somewhere someone has to give something up. And when people are prepared to give it up, hopefully it's not too late.
Yeah, indeed, and it's 20 odd years without the Bledisloe is a long time, but it's not just that; it's just super sides not making finals and probably not inspiring the next generation, and that's perhaps just as damaging. What the high performance review into last year's World Cup disappointment? I imagine you wouldn't have been asked to add your input, but. Are you able to share a little bit more around what you meant there by just what you were surprised there with what you were seeing in terms of, was it merely the fact that skills weren't up to speed, or is it?
Well, no, I think the players were very skilled. I think, it's if you went through and wrote down everything that you would expect a high performance test athlete to have, then I would suggest that maybe some of those things are missing, and it's no fault of the player, because you only know what you know. The problem is with the high performance program. And if you don't deliver a high performance program, and because you don't have enough money or you don't want to, and I don't think it's because they don't want it. I mean, money is a problem. And I think that's one of the things Eddie was pretty strong on. I think we need to be doing X, Y, and Z, and I think everyone knows what the things are, but again, no one's prepared to say, right, we've got to sacrifice this for that.
Yeah, I sense a lot of that's happening out of necessity with the Rebels falling over, and then Brumbies handing over the reins to RA. I actually remember when I played, they were so misaligned that we would be doing different gym programs one week at Brumbies, and then the June test would come in and it would be a completely different gym program, and then you'd be muscles sore and all this kind of thing. It wasn't aligned, and in no way was it high performance. It's very much just a word or an acronym these days, or back then, sorry.
Yeah, and look, I think if you can't get alignment from the top down and the bottom up, then you're in trouble. And I'm not saying we've got it all right here, because we're having the same problems with our governance of the game. we spent a lot of money on getting a report done, and no one wants to do what the report says, because it means someone's going to miss out on having a job or a say, or and when this change, none of us like it, but unless it doesn't affect us. If it doesn't affect us, we're all happy to have change, but if it affects us, we don't like it. So we've just got to understand that what's bigger, us or the game. And whether we like it or not, we're not here forever, but the game hopefully will be. So the decisions we make have got to be around making the game better. And if that means I have to take a back step and lose some of what I've got, then okay, well, I better make sure that it is right for the game. And if it is right for the game, then let's do it.
Steve, on a lighter note, let's have your favourite Bledisloe memory. Is there one?
They're all pretty good, apart from the times we lost.
All those 2 out of 20, yeah.
It might have been more than that. It might have been 3 or 4. But
oh gosh, so
there's some great games. Like it always felt good after we'd maybe we'd lost a game, and then we come back home we played the next one and we'd sorted out the problem. They were always good feelings, but I guess the best moment is drinking out of it. And Australia will get their turn eventually as well. Like, it'll happen because sport, you can't just keep on. Like, some point, it's a two-horse race, and sooner or later someone's going to, upset the apple cart and win it, and it'll be such a wonderful thing for those people that are involved, because they'll get to drink out of it, and they'll have said, well, we haven't done this for 50 years, whatever it might be. Just being able to walk away and say, well, it didn't happen on my watch, was probably the biggest.
I think 2015, I think we managed to win the first game in Australia and then back to Eden Park, and it was plenty of guys their last game, or in New Zealand. What's the week like? Because I remember speaking to, I think it might have been Ma'a, and he said that week was just. I think you guys had the clip playing consistently in team room, and it was just like obviously you're not going to improve the skills, but in terms of tapping into a mental side of the players and getting a bit of ownership, what does that week look like to get them up for such a big game?
Well, I think it starts with the signing off the last one, and having some honesty around that, and they were a good group of men, that 215 side. They're very talented, but they're very honest with themselves and each other as well. And we've already talked about the leadership. They were well led, and so you didn't have to do too much, because they knew what was on the line. And after the World Cup, Bledisloe Cup's the most important trophy we play for. So, and one of them we only play for every 4 years. So it kind of makes the Bled the big one. And World Cup year, we probably, my time, the Rugby Championship was important, but we would make some sacrifices during World Cup year around the Rugby Championship. And however, non-World Cup years, the Rugby Championship was important too. But if we came off a loss, it was always a different feeling, because they went deeper. We all did, we all looked at ourselves, the coaches, me, starting with me, what could I do better than I did last week? And that sort of built from there. And as the week came on, we started to get really excited about the opportunity, and invariably it would be at Eden Park or somewhere in New Zealand. If we lost the first one, it would normally be in Sydney or Brisbane. I think we lost once in Perth as well. But by the time you get to Saturday, you knew that, righto, we're ready, and we're really ready. So Aussie have to be really ready too. And the hard thing for the Aussie team was they'd had a success, and everyone telling them, oh no, this is going to be the year, and started patting them on the back before the job got done. So you only needed a little 2-3% pressure valve to let it off, and whereas we probably had a 5 to 10% pressure valve putting on. So it's a big swing. So we never used to worry too much about whatever the score was in the previous one. If we'd been beaten, we'd just worry about what we had to get right. And invariably you'd get to Saturday when, okay, we've had a good training week and let's go and have some fun. And don't play inhibited. Like we weren't a team that were frightened by losing, but we're more a team that responded to wanting to be better. And sometimes, like, we've won games, and you could see during the week that group they just were so much more in tune because they weren't happy with how they played. And so the result wasn't the big thing; it was how we played that drove them. And obviously, it went deeper when you lost because it hurts when you lose. Emotionally, you're affected more than you are when you win. I mean, I don't know how many games you won in the last minute, but the feeling you have just before that last minute is shit. And then, you kick a penalty or score a late try and the emotion's totally different. But it covers up stuff if you do that too often. But that group was pretty good at not covering stuff up.
Oh, it's a heck of a group. Look, I'm going to be greedy and ask last one. From a Roosters perspective in the NRL, they've got Joey Manu, who's going to be joining with you in Japan, which is very exciting. A comment on him, but also a comment on his other centre partner, Joey Suwali, because he's going to be joining the Wallabies in the coming months as well. What do you think of him? And you're a man who got the best out of Sonny Bill Williams, so you're someone who knows how to integrate a rugby player into a rugby union system.
Yeah, well, I think that's the big thing. We've got to integrate him. We can't just click our fingers and expect him to be a superstar, even though he is a superstar coming from one code to the other. They're different games. So trying to we need to give him a break too. Like, he's had a pretty big season, even though he broke his hand and got a few weeks off. We'll bring him in quietly and get him to feel part of the group and slowly introduce him to the game of rugby, find out really how much he has remembered from his old playing days. And being a back, it's a little easier. I think if we play him in the centres, it becomes a bit more difficult because there's a lot more happening there. But if we play him in the back three, particularly fullback, I think he's very good under the high ball. He's a great returner of the football. I can't honestly say what he's like at kicking it, but we can teach him. That's a skill, and he's an athlete, so you'll be able to teach him how to kick the ball. But those things, put him in a position where he's comfortable and he knows he can actually do some things really well. And then just slowly introduce him into the game so he doesn't lose his confidence. That'll be important. Every conversation I've had with him, I've been really impressed with him. I think he's a super character of a bloke, and he's coming for all the right reasons, and it's none of it's money. He's coming because he wants to play rugby, and I think that's a wonderful thing too for us. I think it's good that we can introduce him to the sport again, away from the spotlight of New Zealand. And I've got no doubt if he's going really good, then we'll probably see he'll end up going back to New Zealand and try and make the All Blacks, which would be wonderful if he does. And if we can play a part in that journey, then it'll be great. But I'm really looking forward to working with him because what I've seen and heard from him tells me he's a good man. And what I hear from other people, they tell me he's a good man. So it's nice working with people like that.
Oh, it's been really special to have you on this edition of the pod, particularly so close to a Bledisloe match. But you've only got a couple of weeks back home in New Zealand before you get back to Japan. So the rugby season, it just doesn't sleep. But thank you again for coming today and sharing your time.
No problem. Nice to see you both, and keep up the good work with spreading the message about rugby.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks a lot, mate.
Hey, how good was that? Steve Hansen, he's got a lot to say about the game, but there's barely a more informed voice out there than Steve Hansen.
Oh, well and truly, he's amazing. And, we spoke about the 2015 team versus, the current Springboks team. I'll tell you, the two coaches, I'd love to see those guys go head-to-head because in terms of mind games, Rassie, we know, loves to play him, but Steve Hansen, he's just the same. I still remember my first couple tests, he would always just stand on halfway and watch you kick restarts. You don't have to ask him to move out of the way as you do your restarts, and he'd just stare at you while you kicked goals. And you knew what he was doing, but like over time, it would just compound a little bit, and you just a sense of unease. And yeah, I think he's such a good character, and as you say, not many people better informed than him.
I imagine that you wouldn't have spoken to Steve for half an hour before, and you played against his sides for 6-7 years.
Yeah, no, not at all. The most I've spoken to him, other than what we just did now, was in Japan after a game when we played Toyota. And I actually said to him, I said, I spoke about his little antics pre-game and all this. And I still remember in his dry smile, he just looks over me and goes, "Oh, I'm sorry if I did that. And if you felt that way, mate, that's a bit unfortunate." So he's a character, that's for sure. So it's nice to be kind of on a non-competitive way because he often wins those.
Oh, he certainly does. And look, yeah, you do. It was funny hearing Steve go, look, he was a bit relieved that he never had to be the coach that handed over the Bledisloe Cup. It is something that there must be so much pressure on that figurehead.
Yeah, look, and, there were particularly in maybe, 14, 15 and 19 years that there were kind of deciders, or there were games where it was pushed, and I'm sure those thoughts went through their head. And look, it's honestly, in a weird way, it's nice to hear that the Kiwis do value the Bledisloe so much, because you can imagine after 20 odd years, the tendency would be to kind of say, "Oh yeah, here we go, another one." But it is a little bit nice to hear him say how much they value it, and I guess that's why it's been so hard to get it back off them.
Well, off the back of South Africa leaving as well, I think that was even more important to kind of hear someone like Steve talk about that as well. So, look, that 2015 and 2019, those tests in particular, knowing that they won in Sydney, you won in Sydney, and then won again in Perth, and then just couldn't finish off the job in Auckland. But the decisions and I remember Dan Carter being backed in 2015, and Czech was a bit experimental with his tens. He gave opportunities for a couple other guys, and it didn't work. And Steve, Dan was struggling at the time, and Steve Hansen backed him, and then he goes and delivers a World Cup for him as well. So it was a bit of a coaching masterclass, I thought.
Yeah, it really was. And it's very much like hindsight, you can kind of say, "Oh, it was always going to happen. It was always going to happen." No, there was real pressure for Dan Carter to come back. And, at that time, I think Beauden Barrett, Aaron Cruden, these guys were lighting it up.
Well, Lima Sopawanga as well.
Lima Sopawanga doing his kicks behind his head, all these kind of things. So they had options, well and truly. And Carter, but they kind of very much stuck true to their guns, and they learned from what they said in 2007 in terms of about changing it too much, and they stuck to their guns. And gosh, they I still remember that French game, the quarterfinal, where he just kind of put on a masterclass. It felt like the British Lions 2005, because he just really stood up. Fast forward, and he's in the final. He's kicking a goal with his wrong foot in front of the goal, and he's having fun, just like Steve said. He's a guy who likes to have fun, and like I said, not many guys can say they've kicked a goal in the World Cup final with the wrong foot. So it's pretty good.
Let's just turn to some news late last week. James O'Connor decision to leave Queensland. I think he was offered a contract, and look, it was a low six-figure deal from my understanding, so I can understand why he's right in the twilight of his career. Probably recognises he's now not in the Wallabies calculations. Joe Schmidt's made it pretty clear that he wants to back in some of the younger guys. How do you think that – I don't know if it's quite the end of the three amigos. There might be one more chapter left to be written for Kurtley Beale, but – It does kind of bring to the end a generation of three unbelievable playmakers who played different positions. Quade was clearly a 10, but the other two kind of drifted in 12, 13. James was in the 2019 World Cup to, fullback and wing as well. How do you think those guys will be remembered, and did we get the best out of them?
Oh, I think so. Look, they were amazing players who have contributed to our story, the Wallabies story in so many ways. And look, we'll always, in the heat of it, you'll go, oh, if only this, only that. But, in 10 years' time, we'll look back and go, oh, the glory days of, when you could pick Kirtley and Quade and James and these guys who, like it's very much like being a prime minister. You only kind of appreciate them after the fact. And I think that's very much the same with these guys. They were amazing guys who I was lucky enough to play with at school and at the international level. And it does mark a new chapter, but we've got some talented boys there as well. It's I think they should be extremely proud of what they've given to our game.
I think what I love about their stories as well is that all three of them finished on not necessarily absolute highs, but I think they endeared themselves to the public, at times. Kirtley's story of coming back from a fair bit of adversity over the last 12 months, but he in the 2015 World Cup was just unbelievable off the bench. Quade has had so many ups and downs, but I think him coming back in 2022, 2021 was it, and he, what he did against South Africa there, it was just an unbelievable fairy tale. And then even James O'Connor back at the 2019 World Cup after missing out in 2015, and I think that it was a massive success, his tenure with Queensland. They won the Super Rugby AU tournament. There was a fair bit of leadership there, and so I'm glad that they were able to, at different times, be able to reinvent themselves as players, because all three of them weren't able to run at the same pace that they did in 2010 when they were, scoring tries for fun against the All Blacks in, what was it? It was in Hong Kong, and it was just one of the most unbelievable games and finishes. And that, it's just amazing to think of what they've been able to achieve. But fair play and great to acknowledge James, because I think he, whatever his next move might be, is it Japan, is it the States? I'm not actually certain. But let's go to a question or two from what the punters have asked. And I know that someone asked about the background of Dylan Peach's move to the Western Force from New South Wales. And I put in a story last week where I was writing around the contracts and the national top-ups and how it was all kind of playing out with Liam Wright, but I also made mention of Dylan Peach's move had been blocked by RA to go to the Force. And from my understanding, things rapidly changed come Thursday and Friday, where Dylan put a bit of heat on RA by saying, no, I want to go. This is what my family and I want to do. And so I think it's a good move for the Force. They've got another guy who's got some pace out wide, who can play in multiple positions, and he's at a good age profile. He's not at the start or his end of his career, and he'll do great things for the Force. So a couple of people had asked about that. Let's go to another one, though. Angus Blythe. So in the context of Peach moving, this is from Rugby Fixation. Someone like a Blythe, there's 5 or 6 now test locks or test-like locks at the Reds. Should someone like an Angus Blythe almost start considering, or should Queensland or RA be considering, or how do you get another player to another franchise who's perhaps not got as much depth as what Queensland will next year when they've got Lucan Salakailoto, Josh Canham, Uru, Ryan Smith? There's a fair few players there.
There is, and look, I dare say in time that it could be the model that is going forward. You think of Ireland, you think of the amount of boys they had to men they had to push around, because Johnny Sexton or Conor Murray were playing at their various provinces. And look, it might happen. At the moment, the Reds are standing on their own 2 feet, and I don't think they'll be letting up any locks go too quickly. So, look, eventually I dare say it's on the radar. I'm sure RA will be wanting to be able to pull the strings. a bit more and yeah, have an influence at that level. But at the moment, it's not there yet. So it's Red's credit.
Yeah, I completely agree. I can't see that changing just for the next little while, particularly when someone like Queensland is not actually signed up to the alignment kind of, they haven't handed over their license to RA like the Tars and the Brumbies have. Jock Cudmore says, hey, Christy, what's the best use of the Lions' money? And there's another person who's asked a similar sort of question. Rugby fan, Observant Fox 1, shout out to you. There's going to be about 100 mil coming from the Lions, 100 mil from the World Cup. What's the best use of money, Matt, from that?
We're probably going to pay off our bills first, our loans, unfortunately.
True.
Yeah, look, it's a tough one because the easy answer for me to say in terms of getting people respecting or whatever is just say grassroots and all that. So there's definitely an element of truth there. The game is fractured at the top as well, where they look to kind of, I don't know if it's stem the flow of blood or whatever. The way they choose that, I don't know. I honestly don't. Like I said, I'd love to say grassroots, invest in the grassroots game and give back, and it often is the answer. But in this case, I'm sure there's a lot of things at play. There's a lot of competing kind of parties at play here, and unfortunately, we have an $80 million loan there that's got to get paid off at some point.
Yeah, I think something like, I agree, and that is the simple solution. It's what everyone's been crying out for. But if you were just to prioritise that, well, how do you see the success over, how do you get the bang for the buck? How do you measure that later on? You just can't instantly throw money in that area. But I would be thinking, targeting 4 of the better players that are 16 and ensuring that they, over the next 5 years, we go after 3-4 players who are top, juniors who the NRL are going to have eyes on, and let's try to get 3 per year, and whether or not that means $50,000 each year for that to try to get them. We can't, I don't think, lose all the guys like the Crichtons, the Kalen Pongers. You've got to be in the conversation to get those sorts of top tier players coming through, I think, and you're not going to get everyone. Not everyone will want to play for the Wallabies either, but I do think that we're going to have to get in the conversation because it's too competitive. And unfortunately, we just don't have those sorts of players. They're all, as Michael Checker was speaking about the other week, a lot of them are being poached and looked at from the NRL clubs at a very young age. So that's where I would be really focusing on. But you're right, there's going to be a fair bit of that go back to the loan to Pacific Equity Partners, I think it is. So, yeah, already about 60 million plus, I think, has already been taken out. So, yeah, all right. There are a couple of the questions. Let's just leave on your Bledisloe prediction. Who wins and scoreline?
Oh, I'm gonna say, no. We'll get up.
I love that. Okay, good.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no. Let's get up. I'm backing them, particularly at home. Guys coming in, some fresh faces, some older heads. 22-19 Wallabies.
Wow. Okay, that'd be some story. Well, you did say beforehand players aren't always the best judge of this, but I don't think I'm yeah, former player. I would say that the ABs will be in the high 30s. I don't think it'll be a blowout, but I think at halftime they'll be in the contest. It's just I don't see them being able to stay with the punch of the ABs when they can bring on some guys. So we will see. Looking forward to it. Great podcast. Great to have Steve Hansen. Let us know. Give us some feedback, shout outs, and we'll continue to try to answer your questions and get some guests that make you kind of wanting to listen more. So anyway, about time we bid you farewell, and I look forward to it in another week's time.
Peace.